Welcome back to Haunted Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 7 true disturbing stories from British Columbia. These are tales of people who ventured into remote logging roads, old trails, river valleys, and mountain backcountry, and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The rain out on Vancouver Island doesn't fall the way it does in the city. It doesn't sprinkle. It doesn't start. It just sort of appears, like someone turned the air into wet fabric. Everything goes dark green and slick. The cedar bark looks almost black. Even your jacket smells like a cold penny after a while. I was up near an old spur road outside Port Renfrew, not far from where the pavement gives up and the gravel takes over, because I'd gotten it into my head that I needed one full night alone to reset. That's what I told myself anyway. I'd been putting it off for weeks. Work had been a mess, my sleep was trash, and my apartment felt like it was shrinking around me. So I borrowed my friend's little SUV Myra's, not mine, and packed like I was going on some heroic expedition, even though it was basically just one night of camping and then coffee in the morning. I remember stupid details like the coffee. I brewed it at home and poured it into a thermos, and by the time I was on the highway it tasted like burnt plastic. I also remember I forgot forks. Like plural, I packed 2 knives somehow, but no forks. I ate a granola bar in the driver's seat with rain tapping the windshield and felt annoyed at myself in this very ordinary human way. The road I took was one of those logging spurs you only find by accident or because somebody told you. There was no sign, just a gap in the ferns and a kind of rutted incline that looked like it led nowhere. I'd found it on a forum post, one of those threads where people argue about secret spots, and then someone finally drops a vague pin like they're doing a favor. It felt like that kind of place, like you were trespassing on something that didn't want visitors. The first thing I noticed was the silence when I killed the engine. Not quiet silence. No far-off highway hum, no distant boat, not even the usual chatter of birds. There was this thick, damp stillness that made my ears feel plugged. I actually clicked my jaw a few times like I could pop them. I told myself it was just the rain. Rain can mute everything. I set up my tent in a patch of flattened grass beside the road because I didn't feel like bushwhacking and because I was being lazy, honestly. I remember the grass looked pressed down in a long oval, like something had slept there. Elk maybe, or a bear. I stood there staring at it longer than I needed to, trying to decide if that was a reason to leave or just a reason to stop overthinking. I stayed. My setup was basic. Cheap headlamp, foam pad, sleeping bag that always smells faintly of old campfire even after washing. I hung my food bag from a branch because you're supposed to, and because I didn't want to be the idiot who feeds a bear. The rope I used had this frayed spot near the end that I'd meant to cut off, but I didn't. I remember that because later I kept thinking about it in this weird, angry way, like if I just cut the rope, none of it would have happened, which makes no sense. But fear makes you bargain with stupid things around dusk, if you can even call it that. Under that canopy, the rain eased up. Not stopped, just eased. The forest brightened a little, like someone turned a dimmer switch half a notch. I ate instant noodles from the pot because, again, no forks, and watched water drip from the ends of cedar branches in steady, patient drops. The smell out there was sharp and sweet, like crushed needles and wet bark. It should have been calming. It was calming for a while. Then I heard something that didn't fit. It sounded like a person walking, but wrong. Not crunching leaves, not snapping sticks. More like the soft, careful sound of bare feet on damp ground. A sort of slow slap. And it wasn't coming from far away. It was close enough that my shoulders tensed automatically. I froze with the pot still in my hands, steam curling up into the wet air. My first thought was, another camper, someone else found this spot, which annoyed me weirdly, like I'd come out here for solitude and here comes some stranger. So I called out quietly, not shouting, "Hey, just so you know, I'm set up here." No answer. The footstep sound stopped for maybe 2 seconds and then resumed farther to my left, like whatever it was had changed direction without any effort, like it wasn't walking around me. It was orbiting. I told myself it was a deer. I've heard deer do weird stuff in the woods. I've heard them walk up on campsites. I've heard them breathe right outside a tent and scare the life out of someone. Deer are basically ghosts with hooves, but deer don't walk like that. They don't do that soft, deliberate footfall, and they definitely don't stop the way this thing stopped, like it had listened. I ate faster. I got my little camp chair closer to the tent. I checked the headlamp batteries even though it was still on. That's the kind of thing I do when I'm nervous. Busy hands, busy mind. A little later, I heard my food bag creak. That rope, the one with the frayed end, made this faint groan like it was under tension. I looked up at the branch I'd thrown it over. The bag hung there, swaying gently. Rain had mostly stopped, so it wasn't wind, and it wasn't swaying like a normal pendulum. It was doing this small side-to-side tremor, as if something invisible kept nudging it. I told myself the knot was settling, and then very calmly the bag rose, not much, maybe an inch, 2, like someone had lifted it to peek under it, then held it there. The rope stretched tight, the branch bowed. I stood up so fast my chair tipped. My mouth went dry in that instant way, like I'd swallowed flour. My eyes did this stupid thing where they kept looking for hands, for a person, for anything that made sense of it. And then the bag lowered again, slowly, like it had been carefully put back where it belonged. I waited for the explanation to arrive, for the shape in the trees, for the bear, for the other camper laughing, saying, "Sorry, didn't mean to freak you out." Nothing. I walked to the tree, keeping my light trained up into the branches. The rope was untouched. No fraying beyond what I already knew. The bag wasn't ripped, wasn't wet, wasn't disturbed. I put my hand on it anyway, like that would tell me something. It was cold and heavy and completely normal. That's when I realized how quiet it had become again. Not just the forest, me. Even my breathing had gone shallow. I went back to the tent and zipped it almost all the way, leaving a gap at the top because I was trying to be reasonable. I told myself that camping alone always makes you jumpy and the brain looks for patterns. The bag could have caught on the branch and slipped. The steps could have been raccoon, weird bird. I lay down, boots still on, and listened. The steps came back after maybe 10 minutes. Same soft slap, this time closer to the tent, right outside on the other side of the nylon. I held my breath without meaning to. The sound moved around the tent, slow and methodical. Then it stopped at the foot of my sleeping bag. The nylon dimpled inward, not like wind. Like something pressed a fingertip against it. The fabric pushed toward my feet, held there for a second, then released. I didn't move, I didn't even blink properly. I remember my eyes stinging. The dimple appeared again higher up, near where my knees were. Press, hold, release. I wanted to tell myself it was a branch, that a branch had fallen and was brushing the tent. But I'd cleared the area. I'd been lazy, but not that lazy. And this was too precise, too curious. The third time it pressed, it dragged. A slow, deliberate line across the nylon, from my knees toward my hip, like a finger tracing to figure out where I was. The fabric made this faint squeal, and then there was a sound I still don't know how to describe without sounding ridiculous. It was like someone trying to swallow a word, like a throat clearing but wet, held back. Then, right beside my head, a voice said very softly, "You're awake." Not shouted, not hissed, just stated, like it had been waiting for confirmation. My whole body went cold in a different way, internal, like my organs tightened, because the voice was mine, not like mine. It was my exact tone, my cadence. The little upward lift at the end of a sentence that I hate hearing in recordings. I didn't answer, I couldn't. My tongue felt stuck to the roof of my mouth. Outside, something shifted. I could hear it breathing now, very close, and the breath didn't sound like an animal's. It sounded shallow and controlled, like it was trying to imitate breathing. The nylon at the side of the tent bulged outward, like something leaned against it with its shoulder. The whole wall bowed. I could see a shape through the fabric, a darker silhouette blocking my headlamp's glow from inside. It wasn't tall. That was the weird part. It crouched low. Its head was near the middle of the wall, not up near the top. Then it did the thing I can't stop seeing. A hand, if you can call it that, pressed flat against the tent wall. The fabric stretched, and for a second the outline came through clearly. Not fingers exactly, 4 long segments that looked like finger bones but too many joints, like each one bent twice where it should bend once. And the thumb was on the wrong side. It moved slow, like it was testing the material, and as it moved, the segments clicked against each other under the nylon. Little dry taps like knuckles. I don't know why that was the moment I broke. The voice being mine should have done it. The tracing should have done it. But seeing that wrong-handed shape through the thin fabric, it made my brain finally accept that this wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. It was something that understood just enough to pretend. I grabbed my car keys and my knife and slammed my shoulder into the tent door, ripping the zipper open because my hands wouldn't work properly. Rainwater sprayed in. Cold air hit my face. I crawled out on my knees into mud and ferns, and my headlamp beam swung wildly, catching tree trunks, wet leaves, nothing then something. A pale shape, low to the ground, tucked beside the tent like it had been waiting there. It wasn't smooth pale like a ghost. It was pale like skin that never sees sun, with dirt streaked into it, like someone had been crawling underground. Its shoulders were too narrow, almost delicate, but its arms were long enough that its hands rested on the ground even while it crouched. It turned its head toward me. The movement was too smooth, not jerky like a startled animal. Smooth like the head was mounted on something that didn't resist, and there were no eyes, just flat skin, but there were indentations where eyes should be, like shallow thumbprints in dough. It opened its mouth, and I swear to you it smiled with my smile. The same slight crooked lift on the left side. Then it spoke again in my voice and said, "Don't run." I ran. I ran so hard I slipped twice and caught myself on wet salal leaves that tore at my palms. I didn't bother with the food bag. I didn't even look back properly. I just bolted for the SUV, fumbling the keys, shoving myself into the seat. When I turned the ignition, it clicked, just clicked. The engine didn't catch, of course. I slammed my fist into the steering wheel, one quick stupid hit, and tried again. Click. I could hear something behind me now, not footsteps, but that soft slap faster, coming closer. I tried a third time and the engine finally turned over, coughing like it was irritated to be awake. Headlights washed across the wet road and the trees, and in that sweep of light I saw it in the rearview mirror. It was standing now, right behind the SUV, too close, and it had risen in this straight, controlled way, like a puppet pulled upright. Its arms hung too low. Its wrong hand was lifted, palm against my rear window. And the iconic thing, the thing that made my stomach flip even as I slammed the car into gear, was that its palm left a print on the glass. Not a normal handprint, a wet, pale print with too many joint marks, like someone had pressed a hand made of segmented sticks into condensation. And at the center of the palm was a perfect oval spot where no moisture stuck at all, like the glass refused to fog there. I floored it. Gravel spit. The SUV fishtailed, and for a half second I thought I'd hit a tree and that would be it. But the tires caught, and I shot down the spur road like a panicked animal. I kept expecting it to chase, to leap onto the car, to appear in the road ahead. But it didn't. The slap stopped as soon as I got maybe 30 yards away, like there was a boundary I couldn't see. I didn't stop until I hit pavement and saw a reflective sign and a patch of sky that looked more open. I drove all the way to a gas station with fluorescent lights and parked under them like they were holy. My hands shook so badly I couldn't open the thermos. I sat there for, honestly, I don't know, 10 minutes, an hour. I kept checking the rear seats like a paranoid person. When I finally got out to breathe, I walked around to the back window to see if the print was still there. And this is the part that still makes me feel weirdly embarrassed, like I'm confessing something childish. The print was gone. But there were 4 parallel scratches on the inside of the rear window. Inside, like something had dragged those segmented fingers across the glass from within the vehicle. Long, faint lines, almost like the kind you get when you wipe dust with a dirty cloth, except they were too evenly spaced and too straight. I stood there under the gas station lights, listening to the buzz of electricity, and I realized I'd left the tent, the sleeping bag. My keys had been in my hand the whole time, so it hadn't taken those. But it had checked. It had touched the car, and somehow those marks existed where nothing should have been able to reach. I drove home before dawn. I didn't tell Myra why I returned her SUV with muddy floor mats and shaking hands. I just cleaned it as best I could and said, "Sorry, the road was rough." Sometimes when I'm alone and I'm about to fall asleep, I hear that soft slap of bare feet on damp ground. Not in the hallway, not outside my apartment, just in my memory, like it's walking a slow circle around the edge of my mind. And I still catch myself at weird moments whispering, "I'm awake," like I'm answering something I can't see. Story 2. The Fraser Canyon has this way of making you feel small without even trying. It's not like being in a wide-open prairie where you can see forever. It's the opposite. It's walls. Rock and river and highway squeeze together like somebody forced geography into a narrow throat. You drive with your window cracked, and the air smells like hot stone and water and brake dust. I was heading north from Hope, maybe late August, early September, because my uncle had asked me to check on an old family cabin that hadn't been used in years. Not a vacation cabin, more like a rough little place he and my dad built back when they thought they could survive on fishing and stubbornness. My uncle, Arden Praux, called it the box. That wasn't affectionate, it was accurate. He'd texted me a key and a pin drop, and then, as an afterthought, he said, "If the wind starts up at night, don't listen to it." Which, you know, that's the kind of thing that sounds like a joke until you're alone and the wind starts up at night. The cabin was tucked off a gravel access road above the river. The last stretch wasn't really a road so much as 2 tracks through dry grass and loose rock. I remember the heat coming up through my shoes when I got out, and the way my water bottle, just sitting in the cup holder, was warm like it had been in the sun for hours. There were mundane things I noticed that I wish I hadn't, because now they're fused to the fear. Like the cabin's porch step had one nail half pulled out, sticking up like a tooth, and the screen door didn't latch properly, so it swung open and shut on its own, tapping the frame with this hollow little knock. And inside, the air smelled stale, like old plywood and mouse droppings, and that sweet-sour odor of propane that has leaked just a tiny bit. I went room to room like I was doing an inspection, not because I'm a responsible adult, but because I wanted to keep moving. Stillness out there felt watched. The cabin was one main room with a tiny kitchen counter, a wood stove, and a back bedroom barely big enough for a bed. There was a crawlspace access panel in the floor near the stove, just a square of plywood with a finger hole. I remember thinking, without any real reason, that I hated that panel. I hated how it sat there like a secret. I told myself it was just because crawlspaces are gross. I checked for obvious damage, swept away some dead bugs, found an old can of beans that expired in, I don't know, 2014, something like that. I laughed out loud, alone, at the idea that someone might eat those and survive. By late afternoon, the canyon wind picked up. It didn't howl. It did this long, breathy push through the grass and the pines, like the landscape exhaling. The screen door started tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. I tried to fix it with a piece of cord tied around the handle, but it kept slipping. My knots were bad. I can admit that. I eventually wedged a shoe against the bottom to stop it moving. That's when I heard the first sound from under the floor. A dry scrape. Like something shifting in the crawlspace, dragging across dirt or rock. I froze with my hand still on the shoe. Then I laughed again, because that's what I do when I'm nervous, and said out loud, "Mouse." I even crouched and put my ear near the panel like an idiot. The wood felt cool against my cheek. I could smell dust and old smoke. Nothing. I went about my evening, ate a sandwich that tasted like the cooler, drank too much warm water, tried to get a signal on my phone by holding it near the one window that faced the river. No bars, not even that fake one bar that means nothing. As the light faded, the canyon did that thing where shadows stretch fast and the temperature drops like somebody opened a refrigerator. The wind kept pushing at the cabin, and the wood creaked in response, a slow complaining sound. I lit a lantern and read a paperback I'd brought, some stupid thriller I didn't even like, because reading felt normal. My eyes kept sliding to the crawlspace panel though. I kept thinking I saw it shift just slightly, but it never did. Around, I want to say 10:30, my phone said something like that, but the time out there didn't feel real. The scrape came back. This time it was longer, like something moving with purpose. Not scurrying, not random. A slow drag, then a pause, then another drag. And as it moved, the wood stove pipe, running down through the floor, gave off this faint vibration, like the motion beneath was touching it. I told myself it was the wind. The wind can get under a cabin and make debris move. It can rattle things. It can do all kinds of weird, low-frequency stuff. But the wind had a rhythm. This did too. I stood up and took 2 steps toward the panel, lantern held low. My heart was doing that stupid hard thump that makes you feel like you're overheated. I remember the air tasting metallic, like pennies again, even though there was no reason for that. The scrape stopped. Silence. Then, very softly, 3 knocks from beneath the panel. Not on the panel itself. Not exactly. More like on one of the support beams, so the sound traveled through the floor. Thunk, thunk, thunk. I just stood there, lantern in hand, trying to find a rational place to put that sound. Rodent? No, rodents don't knock. Loose boards? Maybe, but 3 knocks in a row, that's a human pattern. That's a hello pattern. I said very quietly, "Is someone down there?" I expected nothing. I expected my own voice to make me feel better. Instead, from under the floor, something whispered, "Yes." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was like a person answering in a library, except the voice sounded compressed, like it was being forced through a narrow gap, like talking with your mouth full of cotton. My stomach tightened so hard I thought I might gag. I backed away from the panel and almost tripped over the chair. The lantern swung, throwing shadows all over the walls. I remember seeing the shadow of the crawlspace panel stretch and warp and thinking, irrationally, that it looked like a trapdoor in an old movie. The whisper came again, a little louder. "Let me out." I don't know why, but my first thought was monster. It was person, like a homeless guy crawled under the cabin, like someone was hiding from something, like someone needed help. And then my brain added, why would someone be under there all day? Why didn't I hear them earlier? Why didn't they call out when I arrived? I stood with my back against the wall, lantern held like it could protect me. "Who are you?" I asked. A pause, a small shifting sound, then cold. That was the answer, not "I'm so-and-so," not "I got stuck." Just cold, said like a name. The wind hit the cabin hard enough to make it groan. The screen door wedged by my shoe still tapped faintly, like it was laughing at me. I realized I'd been staring at the panel the whole time and I couldn't stop. Then the panel lifted, not fully, just one corner prying up with the slow resistance of old wood. Dust puffed out. The lantern light slipped into the gap, and for a second I saw skin, pale and mottled like something soaked in river water too long, and dark hair plastered to it in strings. A face was rising into the gap, only it wasn't oriented right. It was sideways, like it had twisted its neck to look up, but the twist was too far, not a painful twist, a casual one. Like its head could rest at that angle naturally. Its cheek slid into view, then its mouth, and the mouth was stretched wide in a grin that didn't match the whispery voice at all. The iconic moment, this is the part that comes back in dreams, was the teeth, not sharp, not animal, just too many, like rows behind rows, small and even, as if someone had packed them in without leaving space. When it smiled, the teeth looked like white grains of rice pressed into flesh. The lantern shook in my hand. My knees went weak and I hated myself for it. I wanted to run, but my feet stayed stuck like the floor had glued them. The face whispered again, but now it wasn't my brain hearing a voice. It was the cabin hearing it. The wood vibrated with it. "Let me out," it said, and the grin widened, stretching those teeth. The panel lifted higher. I snapped out of it then, pure animal panic. I lunged forward, not toward it, but toward the wood stove poker leaning against the wall. I grabbed it like it was a baseball bat and slammed it down on the panel. The sound was brutal, hollow wood cracking, dust exploding up. I hit it again. The panel dropped back into place with a thud, and from beneath, something struck upward hard enough to bounce it. I stumbled backward. The lantern almost fell. Under the floor, the knocking started again. Not 3 polite knocks. Rapid, furious pounding. The whole cabin shuddered. I could hear that compressed voice changing, like it was losing patience, losing whatever mask it had. The crawl space panel bulged as if something was pushing it from below with its shoulders. I ran to the front door, only to realize my shoe wedge was still there. My hands fumbled. The screen door flung open and smacked the frame. Hot canyon air hit me, then cold night air right after. I sprinted to my truck, my little beat-up Tacoma, and shoved the key in. Started immediately, thank God, but as the engine turned over, the cabin behind me made this sound like a giant sigh. Like the whole place exhaled. I didn't look back until I was already on the rough track, bouncing and swearing and gripping the wheel too tight. When I did look back, the cabin was just a dark shape. No lights, no movement. The night swallowed it. I drove until I hit a turnout near the highway and pulled over under a street lamp. My hands shook so bad I kept dropping my phone. I called Arden, straight to voicemail. Of course, I sat there breathing hard and tried to tell myself I'd imagined the voice. That the face had been a raccoon, a possum, anything. That fear had made my lantern shadows look like teeth. Then I noticed my jeans. At the knee there were streaks of wet dirt like I'd knelt, but I hadn't knelt. I hadn't gone near the panel enough to get that on me. And on my right boot on the toe there was a smear of something pale, like clay, like the color of that skin in the gap. I wiped it with a napkin and it came off in a thin, greasy film that smelled faintly of river mud. I didn't go back to that cabin. Arden can call it the box all he wants. To me, it's just a mouth in the floor that learned how to ask nicely. Story 3. There's a kind of loneliness in the caribou that doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied. Like the trees and the lake and the miles of nothing are full of something, and you're the only thing that doesn't belong there. I went up near Quesnel for a seasonal job, trail maintenance, cleanup, that sort of thing. Nothing glamorous, just you, a shovel, and whatever your body can handle for 8 hours. I was sharing a bunkhouse with a couple others, but I'm not really a people person, so on my days off I de-hike out alone and fish. It was my version of therapy. No phone, no emails, just water and line and the repetitive, calming motion of casting. The lake I picked one day didn't even have a name on my map. It was just a blue oval tucked behind a ridge, reachable by an old ATV trail that had more grass than dirt. I remember thinking it was almost cute, like a secret. I packed a lunch, peanut butter sandwich, apple, a bag of those salty trail mixed peanuts that always cut your gums. I also had this tiny bottle of sunscreen that had separated, so it came out oily first and then thick. I rubbed it on anyway. I remember the smell of it mixing with bug spray and making this chemical lemon scent that stuck in my nose. The hike-in was easy, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel proud of yourself for getting away. I saw a whiskey jack hop along a branch, looking at me like I owed it something. I found a beer can half crushed in the moss and frowned, like litter was a personal insult. When I reached the lake, the water was still. Not mirror still, more like oil. Dark and heavy, with no ripples except where insects touched down. There were no frogs, no dragonflies. Even the mosquitoes weren't bad, which should have been a clue, but at the time I was just grateful. I set my pack down and took my time because there was no one to impress. I remember I retied my knot twice because I didn't trust it. I remember the line squeaking through my fingers because it was slightly sticky from the heat. I remember thinking my socks felt damp even though my boots were dry. Then I heard a splash. Not a fish, not a feeding ripple. A splash like something stepped into the water from the far side, heavy, deliberate. I looked up, expecting to see a moose or maybe a black bear coming down to drink. Nothing, just the far tree line reflected on the lake's surface. Dark trunks, dark water, no movement. I told myself it was a log shifting. Sometimes logs roll. Sometimes the bank gives way. Normal stuff. I cast my line anyway. The float sat on the surface like a little red dot. I watched it, waited. Let my mind drift into that calm space fishing gives you. Then the float moved, not bobbed, moved, sliding sideways across the surface like something beneath was pulling it with steady pressure. That happens sometimes. Fish can take a line and swim, but this was too smooth, too consistent. No jerks, no stops. Like the line was hooked to a boat. I reeled in quickly. The line came back slack. No weight, no fish. But when the hook reached the shore, it was bare. The bait was gone, cleanly removed, like someone had pinched it off. I stared at it, annoyed, then confused, then a little unsettled, though I tried not to be dramatic about it. I rebaited, cast again, same thing. The float slid. I reeled, bait gone. By the third time, my skin was prickling. The hair on my arms stood up under the sunscreen, and the lake remained dead still, no surface disturbance at all, even though something was clearly interacting with my line. I told myself, turtles. Snapping turtles, but in that lake, that far out, and why would they take the bait without tugging? I was still trying to rationalize when I heard it. A voice from behind me up the trail. Hey. I turned fast, relief hitting me like warmth. Another hiker, another worker, someone normal. No one was there. The trail behind me was empty, just grass and spruce and a bend that disappeared into the trees. I frowned. I actually said out loud, hello. Silence, Then the voice came again, same spot. Same distance, only this time it said my name, not a nickname, not Buddy. My full first name, the way my mother says it when she's disappointed. My stomach dropped, and I had this sudden dizzy feeling like the ground had shifted under my boots. I told myself it was someone from the bunkhouse messing with me. Maybe they de-followed me. Maybe they were trying to scare me. That was my last rational straw, and I clung to it. I started walking back toward the trail, calling, "Very funny, come out." As I got closer to the bend, the air changed. The temperature dropped, not gradually, like I'd stepped into a shadow that wasn't there. And the smell hit me, wet pennies and old algae and something faintly sweet, like fruit left too long. I slowed, every instinct screaming at me to stop. I did stop. I stood there staring at the bend, listening. No footsteps, no movement, but I could feel a tension, like you can feel someone watching you from a window. I started to turn back toward the lake, because fishing suddenly felt like the safest thing in the world compared to walking into that bend. And that's when I saw the footprints. In the moss beside the trail, right where the grass gave way to the darker forest floor. A set of prints that looked like bare feet, wide heel, long toes. Only the toes were too long, and there were too many of them. 7, maybe 8. It's hard to count now because my memory does this weird blur thing around it. But I remember enough to know it wasn't right. There was one set leading toward me, no other prints leading away. I backed up slowly, mouth dry, trying not to fall. And behind me the lake made another splash. I turned. Something pale rose just beneath the surface near the shore. Not a head breaking water like a swimmer. More like a shape pushing up from below, bulging the surface without piercing it, as if the water was a sheet of plastic. The pale mass pressed up, and within it I could see darker shapes, like bones or branches moving inside. Then a hand emerged, not from the water, through it, like the water didn't stop it. The hand lifted, dripping nothing, and it held my bait between 2 fingers like it was showing it to me. The iconic detail, the fingers were webbed, but the webbing looked stitched, like skin pulled tight between them with seam-like lines, puckered and uneven. It was the kind of thing that made my brain say, irrationally, someone made that. The hand turned, and the bait fell back into the lake without a splash. The surface smoothed instantly. Behind me from the bend in the trail, the voice said my name again, closer now, like it had stepped forward. I didn't wait to see it. I didn't run blindly, though. I wish I could tell you I was brave, but really I was just terrified of tripping. I moved fast, controlled, following the shoreline instead of the trail, keeping the lake on my right as if water could be a boundary. I told myself that made sense. Water as a barrier. It's a common thing, right? Superstitions, movies, except I wasn't thinking that. I was just thinking, don't go into the trees. The ground got rough, roots, rocks, sucking mud. My boots slid. I dropped my fishing rod and didn't even stop to grab it. I could hear the voice behind me shifting tone, like it was trying out different ways to sound concerned. Hey, wait, are you okay? My own cadence again, not exactly my voice, but my rhythm. Then it laughed softly, and the laugh wasn't human at all. It was like water bubbling in a throat. I found a fallen log and climbed over it, scraping my shin hard enough to sting. I kept going. My lungs burned. My hands were shaking so much I couldn't have tied a knot if my life depended on it. When I finally hit the old ATV trail again, I sprinted full out, not caring if I fell. The forest around me felt suddenly alive with sound, birds, wind, insects, as if whatever I'd been near was a pocket of deadness and I'd escaped it. I didn't stop until I saw the bunkhouse roof through the trees. I burst in, sweat-soaked, and startled the others. One of them, Yiwu Han, said something like, "Jude, you okay?" And I tried to laugh it off. I said I got turned around. I said the lake was weird. They laughed, not cruelly, just the way people laugh when they don't want to deal with someone else's fear. That night when I took my boots off, I found something in the tread, a strip of pale, translucent skin, thin as wet paper, and it had seam-like lines like stitching running across it in puckered rows. It dried overnight and turned brittle, curling up like dead leaves. When I touched it, it crumbled to dust. I don't fish alone anymore. I still go outdoors. I still hike. But if I come to a lake that's too still, too quiet, where the bugs don't bite and the birds don't talk, I don't stick around to figure out why. Story 4. The first time I drove the sea to sky in winter by myself, I kept thinking about how easy it would be to disappear. Not in a dramatic way, just one patch of black ice, one slide, one quiet drop into trees nobody walks through. The highway looks so controlled when you're on it, guardrails, signs, lights, until you remember what it's pinned between. I was headed up past Squamish toward a backcountry hut I'd booked with 2 friends, but they bylaid last minute. Sick kid for one, relationship blow-up for the other. The booking was non-refundable, and I was stubborn, so I went anyway. I told myself I'd just do a quick overnight, make hot chocolate, hike in a little, hike out, reset, same lie as always. I parked at a plowed pullout and started on a snowed-over trail that was marked technically, but the markers were those little reflective diamonds you only see if your headlamp hits them just right. I had a bright orange toque, a Garmin I barely understood, and a brand new pair of gloves that squeaked when I flexed my fingers. I remember I'd brought a bag of mini marshmallows, and half of them had fused into one sticky lump. I remember my water bladder hose was already freezing, so I kept blowing air back into it like you're supposed to. I remember thinking my breath sounded too loud in the hood of my jacket. The trees up there were heavy with snow. Every branch drooped like it was tired. The sky had that flat gray look like it might snow more, or it might just hang there forever. About 40 minutes in, maybe less, hard to say, my headlamp caught something on a tree that made me stop. A ribbon, pink, tied in a neat bow around a branch at shoulder height. It wasn't a trail marker. It wasn't reflective. It looked like the kind of ribbon you'd see on a gift bag. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if it was just some hiker's way of marking their route or some kid's prank. I told myself someone dropped it. Someone tied it for fun, harmless. Then I saw another and another. They weren't random. They were spaced evenly like breadcrumbs, like somebody wanted you to follow. I should have turned around right there, I know that now. But in the moment, I was irritated more than scared. Like who's littering ribbon in the woods, I followed them. The trail began to dip, subtle at first, then more noticeably. The snow got deeper, softer. My boots sank. The air smelled different down there, less pine, more damp earth, like the snow was thinner and the ground was breathing. Then the woods opened into a hollow. It was a bowl-shaped depression, maybe the size of a small parking lot, surrounded by trees that leaned inward like they were trying to look down. The snow in the hollow was unbroken. No tracks, no animal prints, just a smooth white surface, except for one thing in the middle, a set of antlers not attached to a skull, just antlers placed upright in the snow like a crown. I stood at the edge of the hollow, heart thumping. I told myself it was a hunter's discard or someone's weird art project. People do weird stuff outdoors, but the antlers were too clean, no blood, no ragged bits, like they'd been removed carefully. My headlamp beam flicked, and for a second I saw something else near them, dark lines in the snow. I stepped closer cautiously and realized it was hair. Long, coarse hair arranged in a circle around the antlers like somebody had braided a wreath and then unbraided it. My mouth went dry. I backed up. That's when I heard the snow behind me compress. A single step. I whipped around, headlamp swinging, expecting to see a person on the edge of the hollow. Nothing. But the step came again. closer, slow. Heavy like someone wearing snowshoes, I called out, "Hey, who's there?" No answer. The step continued. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from within the hollow, from behind me where there were no tracks. I spun back toward the center. The snow surface in the middle was rising subtly like something was pushing up under it. A mound swelling, slow, patient. Then it broke, not bursting like an animal, just parting like a seam opening. And something stood up through it without throwing snow off its shoulders, like it didn't disturb the surface. It looked like a person at first glance, and my stupid brain latched onto that. Person-shaped, upright, arms, legs, head, but its joints were wrong. The elbows bent too far back. The knees angled slightly inward, like it had been built from a rough sketch of anatomy rather than the real thing. And it was wearing the antlers, not on its head, through its head. The antlers pierced through the flesh above where ears would be, as if the skull had grown around them. No blood, just skin stretched tight at the base, pale and slightly translucent, veins visible like bluish threads. It lifted its head and I saw its face. No features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth skin pulled over bone. But then, as it tilted, a mouth opened anyway, like a slit forming where no mouth had been. It peeled open slowly, and inside was darkness and wetness, and a sound like wind trying to speak. The iconic moment, a single pink ribbon dangled from that mouth, tied into a neat bow slick with saliva. I didn't stay to watch. I turned and ran uphill, legs burning instantly. Snow grabbed at my boots. My lungs felt like they were tearing. Behind me I heard that heavy step, 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 but it didn't sound like it was chasing in panic. It sounded like it was matching my speed, with zero effort. I veered off the ribbon path and aimed for the known trail markers, the reflective diamonds. I caught one, then another, then another. I focused on them like they were lifelines. The steps behind me stopped the moment I hit the main trail. Not fading, not trailing away, just stopped. As if something had reached an invisible line and couldn't cross. I half collapsed against a tree, gasping, and waited for the sound to resume. It didn't. I hiked out as fast as I could without falling. I drove down the cedar sky with white knuckles and didn't stop until I hit a Tim Hortons and sat in the parking lot under bright lights with a coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. When I got home and unpacked, I found something in my jacket pocket. A pink ribbon folded neatly into a square. Dry, clean, tied in a bow. I didn't put it there. Story 5. Northern BC in spring is muddy in a way that feels personal, like it targets your boots. I was up near Smithers, helping a friend's cousin, Dario Velasquez, check fence lines on a property that backed onto Crown land. I wasn't a ranch person. I'm not even an outdoors person in the competent sense. I'm the kind of person who thinks a nice hike means a trail with a sign and maybe a snack bar somewhere. But Dario needed a second pair of eyes and I owed him. So there I was, stepping over wet grass and trying not to complain. The day started normal. Coffee from a gas station that was too sweet. A dog, Dario's, named Miso, sniffing everything like it was a crime scene. A sky that couldn't decide if it wanted sun or rain, so it did both. We walked the fence line toward an old stand of trees where the land dipped into a marshy stretch. The ground got softer, the air got colder. I remember little details. A torn glove caught on a barb, fluttering like a flag. A chunk of bright blue tarp half buried in mud. The sound of our boots sucking with every step. Miso stopped and stared into the trees. His tail went stiff. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stared, ears forward, like he'd seen something he recognized but didn't like. Dario called him. Miso didn't move. I told myself, deer, bear, maybe a moose. Then Miso backed up slow and pressed against Dario's leg like he wanted to merge into him. That's when I noticed the smell, not swamp, not rot, something sharper, like bleach and wet fur. We kept going because Dario was stubborn, and because, honestly, I didn't want to be the one who got spooked first. The trees ahead were thin and tall, and the light under them looked gray-green like the world was underwater. We found the break in the fence line, an old section where the wire had sagged. Dario crouched to inspect it, muttering about posts and tension. I stood behind him, watching the trees, trying to ignore the sensation of being watched back. Then I heard my phone, not ringing. Not vibrating, just the notification sound. Except I didn't have service out there. I'd checked, I'd complained about it. I pulled my phone out, no notifications, no missed calls, just my lock screen reflecting my own face back at me, pale and tense. I told myself my brain was playing tricks, like hearing phantom vibrations. It happens. The sound came again. Same notification chime, this time from deeper in the trees. Dario looked up. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, suddenly relieved he'd heard it too. We stood there, listening. The chime came a third time, closer. And then from the trees, we heard my voice say, clear as day, "Dario." I felt my stomach drop through the mud, because I hadn't said it, and the voice wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the tree line, from a spot where the shadows were too thick. Dario straightened slowly. "That's you," he whispered. "I didn't," I started, then stopped, because what's the point? He could see my mouth wasn't moving. Miso began to whine, low in his throat. A shape shifted in the trees. At first I thought it was just a person stepping out. Someone in a jacket, someone lost. But as it moved into the light, I realized the proportions were wrong. Too long in the torso, arms swinging too low, head tilted slightly like it wasn't balanced right. It stepped forward and the light caught its face. It wasn't my face, not exactly, but it was arranged like mine. Same general shape, same hair color. Like someone had tried to copy me from memory and got the details slightly off. The eyes were the worst part. They were in the right place, but they didn't move right. They tracked us too smoothly like camera lenses. And when it smiled, its lips pulled back too far, showing gums that looked gray and swollen. The iconic moment. It raised its hand in a little wave, except the hand had 5 fingers, and each finger ended in a blunt, nail-less tip that looked sanded down, like plastic. It spoke again in my voice, but the words were wrong, like it had learned language by listening without understanding. "Come, come, come." Dario grabbed my sleeve and yanked me backward. We ran, boots slipping, fence wire scraping our jackets as we shoved through the sagging gap. Behind us, we heard the notification chime again, rapid now like a machine gun, and over it my voice laughing softly. We didn't stop until we reached the truck. Dario fumbled the keys, hands shaking. Miso scrambled into the back seat, whining, clawing at the floor mat. The engine turned over on the first try, and we tore out of there, mud spraying. We didn't talk for a while, just drove. The road felt too narrow, the trees too close. When we finally stopped at Dario's place, he let Miso out and the dog bolted straight under the porch and wouldn't come out, even for treats. Inside, I checked my phone again like an idiot. No service, no notifications, but in my photo gallery, there was a new video. 10 seconds long, shaky, filmed from inside my pocket like the camera had turned on without me knowing. The audio was clear though. It was my voice right beside the mic, whispering, "Dario," then a wet laugh. I deleted it. I regret that, but I deleted it, because keeping it felt like keeping a piece of it. Story 6. The Kootenays have this soft beauty that feels almost unfair. Mountains like folded blue paper, lakes that look painted, little towns where everyone waves even if they don't know you. I went out near Nelson because my friend's aunt had passed and left her a small cabin property to deal with. My friend, Selene Morty, couldn't face it alone, so I went with her for the weekend. We weren't there to relax. We were there to pack things, take photos for a realtor, decide what to do with old furniture that smelled like decades. The cabin sat off a narrow road that turned into a driveway that turned into nothing. Just gravel and weeds and a clearing with a leaning little building at the center. The windows were dusty. The porch sagged. The place looked like it had been holding its breath for a long time. Inside, it was exactly what you'd expect. Crocheted blankets, old mugs, a calendar stuck on a month from years ago. There was a jar of buttons on a shelf that Selene picked up and shook, just to hear them clack, like she needed proof the place still made noise. I noticed mundane things like the way the cupboard doors didn't match, how one chair leg had been repaired with duct tape, how the curtains smelled like sun-baked dust. We worked for hours, filling boxes, arguing gently about what to keep. At some point, Selene found an old cassette recorder in a drawer, the kind you'd use for dictation. She pressed the button and it whirred to life, surprisingly. We laughed. We played with it like kids. Selene recorded herself saying, "Testing, testing," and then rewound it and listened and laughed again. It felt normal, light. Then, while we were in the back room sorting linens, we heard the recorder play by itself. A click, a whir, then Selene's voice from the living room saying, "Testing, testing." We both froze. Selene looked at me, eyebrows knit. "Did you hit play?" "No," I said. I felt my skin prickle. "Did you?" We walked slowly into the living room. The recorder was on the table where we'd left it. The little tape wheels were turning, and then Selene's recorded voice changed. It said, very softly, "Don't." Selene went pale. "I didn't," she started. The recorder stopped. Click. We stared at it like it was a live animal. Selene reached for it, and I grabbed her wrist without thinking. "Wait," I said. She pulled away, irritated. "It's a recorder, it's old, it probably." The recorder clicked again, played. This time it was Selene's voice. It was a voice that sounded like it had been recorded over too many times, thin, warbled, but still human enough to make my stomach tighten. It said, "Leave what's mine." We stood there, breathing hard, not moving. Selene swallowed. "This is electrical, it's interference. It's..." The recorder rewound on its own. The tape wheels spun backward fast, like someone was holding the rewind button down. Then it played again. Selene's voice, but not the recording from earlier. This was her voice saying something she hadn't said that day. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." The iconic moment. The recorder's little speaker crackled, and underneath Selene's repeated apology, you could hear faint fingernail scratching, like someone dragging nails across wood from very close to the mic. Selene stepped back, hand over her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes, not even in a dramatic way, more like her body reacted before her mind did. We left. That's the short version. We grabbed our coats and keys and got out, but the cabin didn't let us leave cleanly. When we stepped onto the porch, the front door slammed behind us, hard enough to rattle the windows. No wind, no draft, just a decisive slam. Selene jumped and then laughed, sharp and brittle. "Okay, fine, we're leaving." We got in the car. Selene turned the key. Nothing. She tried again. The engine didn't even click. Dead, I told myself. Battery, old car, cold night coming, normal. Then the cassette recorder started playing from inside the cabin, loud enough that we could hear it through the walls. Selene's voice, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Over and over. Selini's hands shook on the steering wheel. What do we do? I didn't know, I still don't know. We got out, ran to the cabin, yanked the door open, unlocked, like it hadn't just slammed, and the recorder was sitting on the table, silent. Selini grabbed it and threw it into a box, like she could bury it under objects and that would solve it. When we returned to the car, it started immediately, like it had been waiting for us to do that. We drove back to town with the box between us, like a bomb. 2 days later, back home, Selini called me. Her voice was flat, like she'd been crying for a while. She said, "I found something in the box." Inside the cassette recorder, behind the tape, there was a folded scrap of paper we hadn't put there. Old, yellowed. On it was Selini's handwriting, not recent, not from that weekend, but undeniably hers. It said, "Don't play it." A story 7. The far north coast of British Columbia feels like the edge of a world that doesn't need you. I went out near Prince Rupert on a work trip, short contract, nothing exciting. The kind of job where you're in town for a week, eat too much takeout, and tell yourself you'll explore, but mostly just sleep. One evening, I drove out to a coastal trail someone at the hotel desk recommended. "Easy walk," she said. "Beautiful at dusk." It was beautiful. That's what makes me angry. The sky was bruised purple over the water. The air smelled like salt and kelp. The forest there is thick, lush, almost tropical looking compared to inland BC. Everything grows like it's competing. I parked in a small lot with one other car. I remember thinking the car looked abandoned because it had a film of sea spray and pine needles stuck to it. But there were no broken windows, no obvious reason to worry. The trail started as gravel, then became packed dirt, then boardwalk in spots where the ground turned swampy. I heard the ocean to my left, steady, calming. I heard ravens overhead. I remember the boardwalk planks were slightly slick, and I kept stepping carefully like an old person. About 15 minutes in, I came to a spot where the trail narrowed and the trees formed a kind of tunnel. The light dimmed. The air got colder, and I noticed something that made my stomach tighten for no good reason. A set of small piles beside the trail, not poop. Not rocks, little stacks of shells, mussels, mostly arranged neatly like someone had been sorting them. I told myself, kids, someone's art, people do that. Then I saw one shell at the top of a stack had something scratched into it, lines, not letters. A crude shape that looked like a person with arms too long. I stopped, stared, then forced myself to keep walking because I didn't want to be the kind of person who freaks out over shell art. The ocean sound grew louder as the trees thinned near an overlook. I stepped onto a rocky outcrop where you could see the water and the islands beyond. The wind picked up, cold and wet. I stood there, breathing it in, trying to feel lucky. That's when I heard footsteps behind me on the trail. I turned, expecting a jogger or a couple. No one. The footsteps continued anyway, boardwalk creaking in that slow, steady rhythm of someone approaching. I called out, "Hello." The creakings stopped. Then from the trees, a voice said very quietly, "Don't turn around again." I did turn around again. Of course I did. And I saw something between the trunks, not fully, just a partial view movement shape. But what I saw was enough to make my mouth go dry. A figure standing perfectly still in the shadows, wearing something that reflected the little remaining light. At first I thought it was a rain jacket. Then I realized it was wet skin, shiny, slick, like it had just come out of the ocean. Its head was tilted, and its shoulders seemed too high, like it was hunched without effort. I took a step back, heart pounding. The figure took a step forward and the boardwalk didn't creak. That's what got me. The absence of sound, like it didn't have weight, like the trail didn't register it. Then it raised an arm, slow and pointed, not at me but past me toward the rocky outcrop, like it was telling me to go out there. My brain tried to rationalize prank, person in a weird suit. Optical illusion, but the wind shifted and I caught the smell, salt and something rotten sweet like dead fish left in sun. I backed toward the trail away from the edge. The figure didn't chase. It just stayed there pointing as if it had all the time in the world. I started to walk fast, then jog, then run. The boardwalk slapped under my shoes, my breath tore in my throat. Behind me I heard the creaking again, slow, steady, not matching my pace, just present. When I reached the parking lot, my car was there. The other car was there too, but the driver's door of the other car was open. I didn't notice it open when I arrived. I'm almost sure I didn't. I got into my car and locked the doors so hard I nearly snapped the key fob. The engine started, thank God. Headlights swept across the lot, the trees. And the iconic moment happened in the beam. On the hood of the other car, arranged neatly, were mussel shells spelling out something that wasn't quite a word, more like a pattern that looked wrong to read. My eyes slid off it like it made me dizzy. I drove away anyway, didn't stop, didn't look back. The next day I checked the soles of my shoes because I tracked mud into the hotel room. In one tread groove, wedged deep, was a tiny shell, clean, wet, smelling faintly of ocean. Except I hadn't stepped on any beach, only the boardwalk and the rocks, and the shell was still wet, as if it had been placed there recently. I threw the shoes out. I know that sounds dramatic, but I did. Dropped them in a dumpster behind the hotel like I was getting rid of a cursed object. Sometimes I still smell salt air when there shouldn't be any, like on a dry day in a landlocked place. And for a second, I'll feel that cold tunnel of trees, and I'll hear boardwalk creaking with footsteps that don't belong to anyone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.